Hey guys, and welcome to my week 1 analysis video. The reason I'm sharing this video with you is that I think it's really important when I'm sharing my language learning journey and the things that I'm doing that you can see exactly what I've done and a bit of detail behind the scenes, because I think there's a lot of times where people maybe will watch these videos and think, oh, okay, he's learning a lot of Spanish very quickly, or sort of, oh, it's amazing, he must just be good at languages. And okay, I've learned a lot of languages and it's really what I love, it's my passion, but it's because I work hard and I do a lot of things with it. So I wanted to really show you that thing so you can sort of actually compare what I'm doing with what you're doing, or have a look at it from a really sort of objective point of view and actually see how and why I'm making all of this progress. So, how's this analysis video going to work then? Well, I want to give you a bit of an idea of my process, my language learning method, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on showing you exactly how many hours that I've studied, because I think saying that I've studied for 1 week is very different from telling you exactly how many hours that I've studied. So that's going to be really important. And then I'm also going to give you an idea of the breakdown of different skills that I've done and my thought process, so you can really understand how I've done things and why I've done things and what works and doesn't work, so that you have a really clear idea of exactly what I've done to learn the Spanish I have in the first week. To start then, we're going to be having a look at how many hours I've been studying. So in total, because every day I keep a record of all the activities I do, and I think that's a really good thing for everyone to get in the habit of doing, because then when you look back, you can see all of those little activities all adding up to making a really big amount of time. So in total, I studied, or I had contact with Spanish for 24 hours this week. So when I say contact, what I mean is a lesson, listening to music, playing video games, reading books, anything which I am doing in Spanish or using Spanish. So even if I'm sort of working and listening to music in the background, I still count that, because that's still sort of all part of my kind of immersion process, or my sort of faux immersion process. And so I think that's really important, is to sort of add in all those things. And so there's certain things that I won't include, like, I don't know, if I'm laying in bed and sort of starting to go to sleep and I'm listening to a bit of music, I don't really include that. But most things I try and include, because for me it's all about staying positive, so I want to include as much as I possibly can. As you can see then, which I've put a nice little graph here, hopefully, if my editing works, you can see a split of how my week looks in terms of the amount of hours that I've studied. So you can see the kind of breakdown of how I organise my time. And you'll notice that my general kind of method, or my plan when I'm learning languages, is to try and do a sort of regular amount each day. And then when I have more time, I like to really boost that doing some really intense study activities and stuff like that. So you'll notice that on a couple of the days, the bars are really, really high compared to the other ones. And that's because on those days I had free time in the evening where I wasn't working, or extra free time in the day, so I was able to do a lot extra. So if you think that in each of these days, there's kind of a small section at the bottom with 1 or 2 hours of lessons. So all of those bars that are really high, that's all the additional activities that I've done of watching TV, listening to music, all of those other things where I'm sort of having contact with Spanish. And so you can clearly see here, there's a couple of days each week where I'm really, really busy, so which would be Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so the amount of study that I can do on those days is really, really limited, and was actually probably just the lessons, and then maybe a little bit of extra stuff when I finished, because I was working in the evenings as well, so I didn't have a huge amount of time to do that. So I think that's really an important thing to think about. And I've also included sort of a little image here of my calendar, so you can kind of see how I fit it into my day, because I was working the normal amount that I do, so including all of my lessons, my courses, and all the other work that I was doing. So this was actually on top, and I was squeezing this in around other things. So you'll notice then there's some times where I was working, and then sometimes where I was sort of studying, if you will. And then there's others what I've called combo. So that's when I'm sort of working and listening to Spanish music, because for me, generally when I'm doing stuff and I can listen to other content, I'm always listening to the language that I'm focusing on. So obviously right now I'm focusing on Spanish. So basically in all of my free time, when I'm not doing something that requires sort of listening for the actual activity, I'm always listening to sort of Spanish music or something like that, because it's just extra exposure. I hear a couple of words I recognize, and it just sort of helps tune my ears to the sounds. Because if you think, like when babies are learning, they kind of have to tune their brains and tune their ears to hear all of the sounds before they can even start speaking. And so that's something that I like to do when I'm learning, because it really helps develop that feeling of when things sound good, your pronunciation, and all that other stuff. Now I want to talk a little bit about intensity, because I think that's a really important thing where I classify all of my activities when I'm studying. So when I talk about intensive and extensive, basically, in my mind at least, intensive is something which is very, very high quality, low quantity. So for example, a lesson is very, very intense study. You're focusing on speaking for a short amount of time, learning a small amount of vocabulary, and so your exposure to the language is fairly limited, but the quality of what you're doing in that thing is really, really great. Extensive is more where you're doing something where it's very, very high quantity, but maybe the quality of your study is a little bit lower. So for example, if I'm just watching YouTube videos with no subtitles and I'm not checking words and phrases I don't understand or repeating it when I don't hear something, that is what I would call extensive. And that's more the immersion stuff. So it's really important, I think, to have a good combination of both. And this week I was really pleased to see that I was about 50-50. So because it was about 12 hours of lessons in total, and then about 12 hours of all of the other activities that I was doing. So I think that's a really nice split in terms of that. Normally I probably wouldn't get it so high with the intensive stuff, specifically from lessons, but I would always normally try and get that 50-50 split, and so I would always top that up by doing a couple of hours of study sessions every couple of days, just to really sort of top up that extensive stuff, because I think it's great listening to music and watching TV and just kind of enjoying it for the content, but I think if you're not really focusing on learning new phrases and noticing things, you're really sort of paying attention, a bit like Sherlock Holmes where he's saying that you see but you don't look, or you don't notice, or you know, that kind of thing. I think it's really important to have that time where you're sitting and actually really going into the detail and trying to understand things and break them down and understand the puzzle that is the language. So here you can see the breakdown of the different skills that I used when I was doing it. So like I said, 50% was intensive, and basically because I'm not doing any other study apart from my baseline lessons, the intensive stuff is always going to be my lessons, because I'm specifically trying to avoid doing any other study, just to really show how much I can learn just from these lessons and the curriculum they have and stuff like that. So just to make it a lot clearer. But that doesn't mean I don't want to do other stuff around it, just to sort of help a little bit and just sort of give me that boost and really sort of immerse me in the language. So you can see that sort of 50% was speaking, and then the other sort of 50% was made up of a little bit of reading, which was a combination of reading a bit of Harry Potter and some video games, because video games is mainly reading, so I put it in that category, and then listening was music and TV shows and stuff like that, which you can see from this breakdown. So I think for me this is really important to see this breakdown, because it's a good way of analysing it. Even if you don't do it every week, if you did it say once a month, you could really look at what you're focusing on and sort of say, okay, am I doing too much listening and not enough reading, or not enough writing? So you'll notice there's no writing there, and that's because at the moment my goal with Spanish isn't really to do anything writing. I want to watch TV, I want to be able to have a conversation, and I want to be able to read books, probably in the distant future. So really, writing at the moment isn't really that applicable, and I don't really have a huge amount of time, because writing, I would say, is generally quite intensive. So it would then sort of push into the study time, and I would much rather, with my goal being more conversational, to focus on having lessons and conversations, and then watching loads of audio content. Because again, if you're thinking, you want to be thinking about the transfer, that all of your passive activities, if your goal is writing, for example, you want to be doing loads of reading. If your goal is speaking, you want to be doing loads of listening, because they transfer more easily when it's audio to audio, or written to written in this case, or at least in my experience anyway. So I think having a look at that is really important. And there we have it. So a really quick analysis of my week. And like I say, I think it's really important to look at this kind of detail, so you kind of I don't just say, oh, I've learned Spanish in a week. You can actually see, okay, I've studied for 24 hours. And the reason this is really important, just to kind of reiterate why I'm doing this whole video and why you kind of made it this far, and thank you very much if you have, it's really because if you're doing 1 hour of lessons each week, that's 4 hours a month. So if you think about it that way, that if you then studied for 6 months, that would be 24 hours. So I've done that same amount of study in 1 week, or contact with the language. And so it's really important to actually, when you're comparing things like that, to be thinking about how much time people are studying, what activities they're doing, and stuff like that. And also, from my perspective as a teacher, I really want to highlight the benefits of all of that passive, extensive activity that I've been doing, because for me, yes, the quality is what you learn in the lessons and when you're really studying. But if you don't have that contact with the language, you're not going to find things you don't understand. You're not going to find questions. And that's really what pushes you forward and makes you go to that next level. And so, especially at those intermediate levels, you need to have a huge amount of input just to really be able to actually find things you don't understand and really start moving forward and filling in those gaps and stuff like that. So this is just for the first week, and my plan for the second week is probably maybe to actually do a bit more of the extensive stuff, because I'm getting really into playing Civilization in Spanish. And so I think that's probably going to be a little bit more. But apart from that, I want to try and maintain the lessons and work on what I've been doing, and then also having the good split between intensive and extensive. So if you like the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another analysis video and showing you the detail of exactly what I've been doing. So yeah, hasta luego.